And welcome again to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. Joining me right now is Tony Gold. It's another episode of the Gold Dust Twins. We're back. I've got so much positive feedback on Tony's time with Cottage Talk that I thought, let's bring him back. Let's do another episode. But this episode is going to be a little bit different than what we normally do. I thought we would have a little fun with this episode. And as everyone knows, Scott Parker has gone to Burnley. So that got me to think about his time at Fulham and what has happened since he left. So that's what this episode is all about. We're going to talk a little bit about Scott Parker to begin with, but then we're going to talk about the pivotal moment of him leaving and what that meant for Fulham Football Club. We know what's happened since then, but I think it's important to look at this time in history and just think about how pivotal that decision of Scott Parker leaving Fulham and Marco Silva coming in and what that has meant to Fulham Football Club. Would we have been the same team with Scott Parker if he stayed? I think we kind of know the answer to that, but we're going to talk about it anyways. Before I do anything else, let me welcome my co-host, my fellow Gold Dust Twin brother here, Mr. Gold. How you doing? You looking forward to doing this?
Looking forward to it, Russ. Yep. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. We are actually recording this 90 minutes before the England match. I thought this would be a good way to get you ready to talk a little Fulham and have some fun because, like I said, this is going to be more fun than anything else. So, yep. Tony, let's get going. Let's start here. Let's start with talking a little bit about Parker, and then we'll talk about the pivotal moment coming up in a little bit of him leaving Fulham and going to Bournemouth, and then Fulham eventually finding his replacement, which turned out to be Marco Silva. But let's talk a little bit about Scott Parker in charge of Fulham in the championship. Now, he had them in the Premier League. Fulham get relegated, and the decision is made to keep Parker in charge when Fulham go down in the championship. I want to get your thoughts on that season. Obviously, it ended really well with that playoff final, and I thought it was a masterclass by Parker, the way that he set Fulham up to beat Brentford. That is all positive. I want to give him full credit on that. But the season itself, it's a mixed bag. And I think a lot has to do with the football, Tony. And the match that stands out for me was the home match against Blackburn, where I really got to see Parker ball. It's the first time I really felt that I'm seeing something a little bit different. I was expecting it to be more like Savisa, but it was Parker ball. So what are your thoughts about the first season? Let's just talk about that to get us going.
Yeah, look, it was an unprecedented season in respects that obviously COVID had hit. Fans weren't allowed into stadiums, and there was no atmosphere. People watching games on the telly, and I think that one of the biggest issues with Scott Parker in charge at that particular time is that the fans couldn't relate to anything or to him because we weren't there. We were just watching it on the television. So there was no atmosphere. You were watching games, with players playing in empty stadiums. And it was just a real surreal time. In defence of him in that particular, moment, it must have been quite difficult and quite challenging. Look, the bottom line is that he got us to a playoff final against our arch rivals, which in an empty stadium we pulled off a result, and he got the job done. Yeah. And obviously, look, had it been a packed Wembley with every supporter there supporting it, it would have been one of the greatest days as a Fulham fan and in our history, because it would have been a moment to really celebrate. But none of us had that opportunity, unfortunately. We were all jumping up and down in front of a television screen. It was just a bit weird, the whole thing. But look, at the end of the day, you can't knock him. He did the job. He did what he was there to do. He got us up. Yes, at times, the football wasn't great to watch. But again, I think a lot of that was down to the fact that there was no atmosphere in the stadium. And I think it was very hard for the players to find a rhythm and to get into a game when most of the matches must have felt like a training session.
It's a good point. And listen, we have to give Scott Parker the credit that he deserves. Like I said, that playoff final, and unfortunately you were not there, Tony. No one was there to experience that with the atmosphere. But that was quite the performance from Fulham Football Club, and tactically he got it spot on against Brentford. I almost said Bournemouth, against Brentford.
Yeah.
So there's a Goldman for you to get the show going. But you know what? It was wonderful, and I was actually hopeful. And I'm going to be honest with you. Going back to the Premier League under Parker, I know the football wasn't the greatest, but I thought, okay, second shot at this. Let's give Parker another chance. So now we go to the Premier League. Let's talk about your thoughts on Fulham in the Premier League, because there's a lot to unpack here. We could really spend a lot of time. I don't want to spend too much time. But you and I were talking off air, and if you look at the players that were brought in, whether they're on loan or not, many of them were on loan. You have some extremely talented players, Tony. You and I were talking about. You added Mario Lemina, Joachim Anderson, Ademola Lookman. Whatever you think of Ruben Loftus-Cheek, he was part of it. Ola Aina. You had some really good players that were there to basically help you stay in the Premier League. And what I remember witnessing is a complete, basically falling apart in the second half of the season. And that was disappointing thing. And as you and I were talking off air, there's one thing that I just think was just a terrible mistake by Parker is he basically decided he didn't want to play Alexander Mitrovic. Instead, he wanted to have Cavallero as a striker. I think that was a huge mistake. So Fulham end up getting relegated, but it was just a terrible season. But there were some good moments. I remember beating Liverpool, beating Everton. There were some good moments there, Tony. It wasn't all bad, but the football wasn't the greatest.
Look, as you say, I think there's so much that you can, unpick in terms of his season in that Premier League. Look, ultimately, football is about levels, Russ, and the Championship is one level. The Premier League is a whole different ball game. I don't think there was a real structure and a real plan in place once we'd got promotion. I don't think Scott Parker was clear in terms of the level that he was going to and what it meant. Then he's throwing all these players into the mix. So there was no camaraderie. There didn't seem like there was any team ethic going on there. Obviously, there was a massive breakdown in relationship between him and Mitro. And, when a manager then decides that, to sort of bench or disregard a striker that's proven in the Championship, not so much proven in the Premier League, but knows that he can do a job there, and then decides that he's not going to play him and he's going to try and turn a winger, a very average winger, into a front man. And then you wonder why we scored 9 goals at home all season, right? Then you wonder why, what's going through his mind. Now, all those players that you mentioned, Joachim Anderson, Loftus-Cheek, Anguissa, Areola, Lookman, Lemina.
Oh, how about Areola?
Yeah, all those players have gone on at some point and have actually had, relatively good or successful careers since they left Fulham and have actually won things. I mean, look at Lookman in the, the final for Atalanta, this year. So, the thing is that, again, a manager's job is to pull a group of players together and get the best out of them in a system that's going to work. The system that Parker adopted in the Premier League that season, that 4-2-3-1, it just did not work. It was a disaster. For some reason, he couldn't lift the players. As I say, not having a centre forward absolutely killed us. And the thing with Scott Parker is he's very good with words, Russ. He's very good with words. He says all the right things, but I think there's very little substance behind it. And I think the Championship is probably the right level for him. Okay. And, you've seen that because he's proved it. He's done it with Fulham. He's done it with Bournemouth. And there's no saying that he might not go and do it with Burnley. But they're going to be exposed to a very different kind of football to what they've been used to under Company. But one thing I want to add, you've got to remember, this is a guy that let Matt O'Reilly go, right? He let Matt O'Reilly go and he signed his brother-in-law, Harry Arter.
That's a good point. I forgot about that. That's a great point.
That's all I'm going to say about Scott Parker in that regard.
I completely forgot about that decision, because that decision, like I said, you look at Matt O'Reilly now at Celtic, and his value is extremely high, and he was here, man. He was here. But he brought in Harry Arter. That's the reason why he was expendable. That's a great point. I almost completely forgot about that. So listen, I'm glad that we're being honest here. We got to give the guy his due, because he actually did get Fulham promoted. But I said this to you off air. I'm going to say it again. I have nothing personal against Parker. I didn't like the football. I'll be the first to say it. But you already said this. Spoken and well-dressed doesn't make you a great manager. It doesn't. It's what you're seeing, but the football still needs to be there. And Tony, the one thing that I will always say, going back to the championship, the one thing that drove me crazy under Parker is that if Fulham went up a goal, I always felt that Parker wanted to win 1-0 or 2-1. He would throw on every flipping defender and hold on for dear life. Yeah. And that is one thing that I can't get behind. I so cannot get behind. So if you're a Burnley supporter listening to this and wanting to know what his tactics are like, I will tell you that it is a controlled game. It is conservative. And if he gets ahead going into the second half, probably around the 60th minute, he's going to basically, he's not looking for that third goal or that second goal. He's looking to see it out by a goal. That's just how he rolls. And Tony, I'm not comfortable with that. And now again, we're going to talk about Marco Silva, how different Fulham are and how they play, how different they are from now back then under Parker to what they do now under Silva. Silva's looking for that extra goal. Silva wants to score.
It's also about adapting to the level that you're at, and
right.
You know, it's the proof is in the pudding, Russ. He took Fulham up, he failed miserably. He took Bournemouth up, he failed miserably. You remember Bournemouth? He lasted 4 games, and then he got sacked after a 9-0 drubbing to Liverpool because he was out of his depth at that level. And you know, there's no shame in holding your hands up and saying, you know what, I'm just not tactically set up or good enough for that level. Then he goes to Club Brugge, as you know, we've spoken about, and he's lasted 12 games at Club Brugge, and he only won 2 of those 12 games and got smashed in the Champions League because he's not at that level. So, you know what, at the moment, at Burnley, given his record on paper, they'll look at it and think, this guy, he gets teams promoted. That's great. If that's what Burnley want, and that's what every team wants from the Championship, is get promoted, that's fine. But history will show you that once he's there, Burnley are only going to go one way if he's in charge.
I totally agree with that. But again, if that's what they're looking for, and I've been listening to a lot of talk from the Burnley supporters, and I understand this, Tony. If you're a supporter, he's your manager, you're going to back the manager. Of course you're going to back the manager. I heard the same type of talk with the Bournemouth supporters. Burnley and Bournemouth, very similar. They're talking the same way. We got to back the manager. We got to back the manager. I get that. But the thing is, the track record shows you that the Championship is probably his level. He goes up, then maybe you have to make a move because he has proven that he cannot do it in the Premier League. And
he's 52 Premier League matches, Russ.
Yep.
And he's won 9. 9 out of 52 games in the Premier League.
Right. So, like I said, I'm sure there can be Burnley supporters listening. And if you're thinking, can he get Burnley promoted? The answer is yes, he probably can. He did it with Bournemouth. He did it with Fulham. Of course he can. But it's going to be an interesting journey for you coming off of Company, going to Parker, because the football is going to be very different. That's all I'm going to say. It's very different. If you're going to have to be patient, you're going to be basically looking at passing back and forth between the center backs and their play. It's very extremely conservative. It's just the way he is. It's the way he is. And if he gets up, if you score that goal, then he's just going to just see it out. That's just the way he is. And me personally, I don't like that type of football. So I am glad that Fulham have moved and have the manager that they have now. But let's now transition. Let's talk about what were your initial thoughts? Because we're coming off of that bad year and we're looking at the whole situation. Like you mentioned, Mitro basically wasn't playing. And we're already hearing chatter that he might not want to come back if Parker was the manager. I remember hearing this. But the first thing I started hearing was that Bournemouth were interested in Parker. So what were your initial thoughts when you started hearing this?
The truth of the matter is, I think that once I started hearing it, I was actually quite pleased, and I was hoping that it would happen and that he'd be gone. I think it got to the stage where it was getting very toxic amongst the fans, the group, and that season it was so turgid and so bad, and so many things were so wrong that I think he'd come to the end, and I think he knew that as well, Russ. I think he knew that as well. And I think that, once he sat down with the Khans to talk about, rebuilding and what that meant, I think they were both on very different pages. It was inevitable.
It was. And we're going to talk about this coming up. Was this a mutual decision? But before we get there, when you look at the toxicity, because it was extremely toxic, and if you listen to the chatter was that there was something going on between, say, the Khans and Parker, that they weren't on the same page, as you just said. So what do you do at that point? And I think the fact that this situation arose leads us to what happened next. And Tony, what was your initial thoughts of Parker leaving Fulham? Were you nervous, or were you thinking this is an opportunity? Because it's interesting, because at first blush, when it happened, I'm thinking, how are they going to bounce back from losing their manager? It's going to be a tough summer without a manager. But as we've seen, it actually turned out to be a huge changing in the guard for Fulham Football Club, a real change and a pivotal moment. His decision to leave, and Fulham basically saying, you can go. You can go to Bournemouth. But what was your initial reaction to the news?
I think when you've been exposed to the likes of Felix Magath, Laurie Sanchez, Claudio Ranieri, you kind of get to the point and thinking, well, it's not going to get much worse. It can't get much worse than that, to be perfectly honest. So I was kind of thinking, well, here we are. This is football now. This is how it is. Scott Parker will move on. We'll get someone else in. They'll come in with new ideas. And, it's a case of hitting the reset button, and we'll start again and see how that pans out. But obviously at that particular time, there were a few names flying around, but I don't think anybody really had any clue about who it was going to be and how that was going to look. So, I was thinking, do Bournemouth really? The truth is, I was thinking to myself, have Bournemouth actually watched Fulham at all this season? That's what I was initially thinking. And I was thinking, fine, do you know what? We're done with Parker now. He's done, we've seen him at his best. We've seen him at his worst. And it was plainly clear to see that he was not ready for the Premier League. It's as simple as that.
Okay. It's funny you say that, because I was thinking the same thing. What were they thinking? Did they watch Fulham under Parker when they were making this decision? But again, full credit to Scott Parker. He talks very well. He talks a great game, obviously, right? Because he got himself not just a second job, not just a third job. He got himself a fourth job. So he can talk a good game. So he talked himself really well, obviously, to get the job at Bournemouth. And like I said, full credit to him, because he got them promoted. But let's go back. Let's talk about this. You've already mentioned this a little bit. Was this a mutual decision? I truly believe this was a mutual decision, Tony. I don't think the Khans were ready to move forward with him. I think this made things a little bit easier. That's just my opinion, that I think this was pretty much a mutual decision.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think that, as I say, because of the such a poor season that he had, and the fact that there was no continuity, Mitrovic was obviously disgruntled. There was a lot of stuff going on in the background, which we still don't know till this day what happened and what it was about. But clearly, Mitro had no respect for him. He had no respect for Mitro. Mitro was a big fan favourite. You know, at the end of the day, you just can't put yourself in that position. And so ultimately, looking at it moving forward, you know, Scott Parker probably had a number of you know, things on his list that he wanted, and the Khans were like, no, I'm afraid we're not going to do that. We can't do this. We can't do that. And I think in the end, they just got to a point where it was like, okay, maybe this is the right time to sort of end it and you know, go our separate ways. And that's basically what happened.
Okay, excellent. All right, Tony, let's move on. And let's talk about this, because this is what the theme of the show is really about, this pivotal moment in Fulham history. Do you think Scott Parker leaving is the most significant moment in Fulham's history since winning promotion in the championship final in 2018? Not after, since that 2018 playoff final, which I was at, which was wonderful. Is this the most significant moment? And before I give you my thoughts, I'll get your thoughts. I want to mention this because I'm glad that you talked about this. Before they decide to go to Marco Silva, the names we were hearing, Cooper was the one that I was hearing the most, Tony. And I was not against that. And I remember hearing a little bit of Marco Silva, but not a lot. It wasn't really strong. And then it seemed out of the blue, but I had heard a little bit about Silva. But let's get back to this moment, because we're looking at Fulham now. The fact that they parted ways with Parker. Parker goes to Bournemouth. Is this the most pivotal moment since that playoff final? Because again, up and down, Fulham now have become a yo-yo club at this point. So they have a chance to really change themselves. I don't think any of us thought that they would turn into the team that they have turned into once Marco Silva arrived. But do we look at this moment of Parker leaving as the most pivotal moment since that playoff final?
I mean, look, Fulham have had some pretty significant moments in their history from various different reasons. I think with Scott Parker leaving, I think it changed the concept of and the foundations of what Fulham are about moving forward. It showed that, you know, we need to have a bit of stability. We need to have a bit of continuity. And I think with the hiring of Marco Silva, it's achieved that, and it's done that. And it's shown that, you know, if you've got a manager that's on board long term, you've got building blocks, because you can then, you know, you've got things to strive towards. All this chopping and changing. I mean, look, if you look at Watford as a prime example, you know, look where they are now. You know, they're in complete disarray. And that's because they've had, like, you know, 20,000 managers in the last, you know, 5 years. You can't build anything. For me, I think Djukanovic was, for me, a really significant point in our history when we appointed him. I think he changed a mindset and a culture. I was absolutely gutted when we got rid of him when in that season. Very similar to Parker. Absolutely gutted. But this is football, Russ. This is the environment that football is now. And managers, unfortunately, you know, it's football's results driven, especially at the top level. And if you don't get the results, you don't stay in the top level very long. So, look, ultimately, with Parker moving on and with Silva coming in, it's definitely been a big, you know, change in our culture and the way that we're playing football.
Totally agree, Tony. That's why I wanted to have a show based around this, because when you look at that moment, and I think what we've learned is Fulham are now stable. Whatever you think about them, are they building something? They become stable, Tony. They have a philosophy. Silva's
They've got an identity now, Russ.
They got an identity.
There's an identity.
That's it. That's the word I was looking for. They have an identity. They did not have what I would call a clear identity under Scott Parker, under Ranieri. They actually had one under Savisa. I'm glad that you brought up Savisa. Is one of my favorite managers. I was, to this day, still upset about that decision. I think it was a wrong decision. I could do a show about the sacking of Savisa, which I thought was a mistake. Okay? But if we don't have the sacking of Savisa and Ranieri and Parker, we don't get Silva. So in a way,
correct,
it all plays out for a reason. Everything has a reason for what happens in life. And in football, it all worked out for Fulham in the end, because now they have, like we talked about, their identity. It's a real identity. And that's something that you can build on for the future. That's why when we get into talking about this season, why it's very frustrating that we are here. Tony, me and you are here on July the 10th, and we don't have a signing. We have probably Fulham's best player on his way. Well, he is going to Bayern Munich, and we want to build something. And I still think that they will, because they have this identity, as we're talking about. They have it. I just wish that they would be a little bit more proactive in this summer so they can take another step forward. But they do have that identity, and it comes, in my opinion, from this moment, the decision for Parker to leave and for Silva to come in. So I'm going to ask you this question. I know everyone watching, listening is going to agree with this. Do Fulham have the same success if Parker stayed? I'm going to ask you, what happens if they don't separate? What do you think would have happened to Fulham?
Oh, well, listen, it's almost impossible to say, but we would have been back in the Championship. Would Scott Parker have had the same hunger and desire to want to go again and push on? I'm not so sure. I don't think we would have seen the caliber of players, coming in. As I said, Mitro probably would have moved on by then, so he doesn't have the season that he has where he scores 45 goals and, ends up having the most unbelievable season. So, no, I don't think Fulham would have had the same success had Parker stayed. I think we would be in a very different place now had he stayed, for sure.
Okay, excellent. All
and
right.
That's not necessarily a positive one, by the way.
Okay. Before we move on and we talk about Marco, one thing I want to talk about is, and you and I talked about this off air, and I think it's also pivotal to discuss Fulham's return to Craven Cottage. It's a 20-year anniversary, Tony. So I think when you look at that and you look at what has happened to Fulham since their return, all of the success, yes, there have been ups and downs, all the yo-yo club stuff too. But the fact that Fulham have a home and will always have a home, and it's Craven Cottage, and I think it's important to talk about.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of people behind the scenes that put a lot of hard work into the football club. No one can deny that. It started from Al Fayed, who put his hand in his pocket. He was very generous. The Khans, whatever people think about them, they're still doing good work behind the scenes. I mean, you look at our ground now and our stadium, and once it's completed and finished, it's spectacular is a big word, but it does look quite amazing when the lights are on the Thames. It's a unique place to be. So, people are doing great work behind the scenes. And at the end of the day, people have got to remember, we are Fulham Football Club. We're not Manchester United. We're not Arsenal. We're not Liverpool. We're not Man City. We are little Fulham down by the river. Yeah. And we are punching well above anywhere, where we should be. Even with the owners that we have and the money that they've got, they've decided they only want to invest to a point where they want to invest, and that's fine. So we just have to lap it up and accept it is what it is. I still think things could be better behind the scenes. I still think that we're lacking in certain areas, certainly around recruitment and on our scouting system. I still think that needs improvement, but we are where we are, Russ. And, we just got to hope that we can keep striving and moving forward, and that our owners are still invested, to do that.
It's a good point. And like I said, I'm glad that you talked about what's going on at Craven Cottage, because once it is finished, Tony, I think it's going to be incredible. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to see it anytime soon. I'm going to say that right now. I'm not going to be coming this year, but I look forward to the day where I can come. But I just think that not only what they have invested, I want to give the Cons a lot of credit. They have invested in Fulham, they've invested in Craven Cottage, and they're going to make it the best it can possibly be. The best comparison I can give you is here in Boston with Fenway Park. John Henry, who owns Liverpool, invested in Fenway Park and made it the best it could be. Well, the Cons are doing the same thing, and it's going to pay off. So for me, I think we will really see the fruits of that labor once it's completed and Fulham can get money from that Riverside stand. I think it's going to pay off, but I just think it's important to look back and look at the decision to come back to Craven Cottage and be at Craven Cottage and why Fulham should always be at Craven Cottage. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. And I think you'll agree with me. It should always be at Craven Cottage. That's Fulham's home. All right.
100%.
Okay, fantastic. Coming up next, Tony and I changed the focus. Now we talk about what happened next. Marco Silva comes in. Okay, Tony. So we focused the first half of the show on Scott Parker, but now we are going to put the focus right on Marco Silva. Now, let's start here because, like I said, I heard things a little bit about Silva's name, but not really strong. It was really underneath the radar that Silva was going to be coming to Fulham. In fact, I remember when they made the announcement, no one had this. No one had Silva coming to Fulham Football Club. That announcement came out of the blue, Tony. So what was your initial reaction to hearing the name Marco Silva?
My initial reaction was I was underwhelmed. I've got to be honest. At the time, I was underwhelmed. I'm not going to sit here and say, "Oh yeah, I was jumping for joy," and it was a great appointment. I was skeptical. I think that if you looked at his his record at Hull, Watford, and Everton, he did okay there, but he didn't set the house on fire. I think it's fair to say, especially with his time at Watford. So yeah, I was pretty underwhelmed. Wasn't overly impressed, and I was thinking, what are we going to do here? His win ratio at Hull and Watford was poor. It improved slightly at Everton, and obviously subsequently now it's actually been even better since he's been at Fulham. But I think that's because the owners have really allowed him to focus on the football and let him get on with it, and haven't really interfered. I don't think that was the case necessarily at Watford. And certainly at Everton, I think maybe the bar was set way too high in terms of what they expected from him and what he was able to deliver. So, yeah, that was my initial thoughts when he first came on board.
Okay, so what's interesting is mine are similar to yours. It's not that I would say I was underwhelmed. It's just that I just was unsure about this pick. Now, I had known the history of Marcos. I also thought to myself, Tony, how badly Everton wanted him. And that got me to think, well, if they wanted him badly enough, at that point, Everton were still heading upward. They weren't where they are now. They were still upward in the top 10. They were still a team to be reckoned with. And they wanted Marco Silva. So I kept saying to myself, why did they want Marco Silva so badly? And he did well at Watford. I did not like how that whole thing played out. And I kind of put that aside, but I kept focusing on the fact that he ended up at Everton and how badly Everton wanted him. And I thought there's got to be something to it. Even though it didn't work in the end, there's got to be something to it. And I remember when we played Everton and he was the manager and I thought they played good football. I think, okay, well, maybe the football is going to be different. And man, was it different, Tony. And we saw this from the get-go. So let's talk about the championship season. This is a special season. And even though Fulham drew in the opening match, I knew then, Tony, I'm going to say it right now. I could see then, I remember the goal from Harry Wilson. I could remember the style of play. I know it was only a draw and it was disappointing. But I thought at that moment, that first game of the season at Craven Cottage, I'm like, we might be on to something. And it just snowballed from there. It was wonderful to watch. It was dominating football. So many goals. It was a joy to watch. The best way for me to talk about that season is pure joy.
It was a great time to be alive, being a Fulham fan. Every game that went by, the expectation grew, got higher. The players, were playing, some fantastic football. He got the best out of, a very good group of players. And the bottom line is that, he got Mitro scoring goals. And ultimately, at the end of the day, to win any league, you need a striker that's going to score goals. And they blew it out the park that season. They blew it out the park. And you've got to remember, not only were we winning games in style, but I think we smashed 3 teams that season 7-0. It was unprecedented in terms of, I don't think you'll see a team on such a high, dominating teams and actually, with their free-flowing football, absolutely carving teams open at time. They could not deal with our attacking play in the final third at times. It was outstanding.
Remember Blackburn away? That's the one that stands out to me. I think that was one of the 7.
Huge. And Luton at home as well. We blew those teams away. And look, Silva put a belief into those players. He trusted the players. And, we were also very lucky. We didn't have many injuries that season. Everything just seemed to fly. And also, I think the other thing on the back foot is that Parker was at Bournemouth. And I think that also drove the players on. They did not want Scott Parker to win that league with Bournemouth. I remember it. We were going head to head with them. And it was like, no way. And in the end, we kicked on and we broke away.
We did. It's funny because they actually made headway near the end, but it didn't matter at that point. It's funny because Bournemouth supporters might tell you, well, we came close. Well, maybe. I mean, technically you did, but Fulham pulled away. They pulled away and I'm going to say, took their foot off the gas at the very end. But the Luton Town matches, I'm glad that you brought that up. I'll never forget watching this YouTube video of this poor Luton Town supporter and talking about all the goals from Fulham. And it was crazy, but it was so special. It was wonderful to watch. And it's funny, Tony, because now we're going to focus on the Premier League. But before we do, I'm not going to lie to you. At the end of the season, we're champions. And I have my doubts. I still have my doubts going back to the Premier League. Are we going to be this yo-yo club? So did you have those thoughts after that season before we started the Premier League season that we might see a continuation of the yo-yo club?
Of course. There's always that trepidation because that's what we're used to. That's what we've been exposed to. And, unfortunately, given the owner's history in terms of their recruitment, in the back of your mind, you're always thinking, have we got enough? Have we signed enough quality to push on? Have we got enough, quality to compete? And I think there's always that worry in the back of your mind that you're going to be short, that you're not going to get the run. How's Silva going to react in certain situations, and we all know that the Premier League is about making sure that you're solid at home and try and win as many home games as you can, but also when you're on the road and you're playing away to pick up those important points against the teams that are in and around you or below you. It's so important. And there's always that worry. And if you can get that, mentality into the players and get them doing that, then, it's about getting points on the board early doors. And once they're on the board, then you know that you've got something to build on.
Okay, excellent. So let's now talk about the first season back. You and I were both a little nervous, like we said, but the recruitment, it was very good. Unfortunately, Fulham are about to lose Paulina. That was really the first sign that Fulham, I think, were changing how that they were going to be, because he truly, in my opinion, we're talking about identity. He gave Fulham this identity. I'm talking about Paulina and how Fulham were going to play that season, because they had that defensive midfielder, that tackling machine. So they could build everything around that. That's why losing Paulina hurt so much, honestly. But when I look at that season, I look at the players that were brought in. Besides Paulina, we have a lot of what I would call reclamation projects. I know how you feel about Pereira, but that was one of these reclamation projects. We bring him in. We bring in some other players. And I'm looking at it on the face of it. Like I said, I'm going back to that Parker season in the Premier League, and maybe that's a better team on paper. But this team gelled together. And as you mentioned, Tony, I think what's important to talk about in regards to Silva's first season, they did something that Fulham don't normally do, and that's, I wouldn't say start fast, but they got the points that they needed early on, where when they got to the second half of the season, they were never, ever in a relegation battle. How often have we been able to say that when Fulham have been in the Premier League in recent history? It's been usually, especially since 2018, you're in a relegation battle, the yo-yo years, right? Yeah. Well, we didn't have to deal with any of that. And that's what was wonderful. And they brought in all different types of players. Unfortunately, Manor Solomon got hurt early, but he comes in later, and he's actually scored some pivotal goals in the second half of the season. But they did enough early doors, as you would say, to be comfortable. First season back is the best way to say you're 10th, man. That's actually better than comfortable.
Yeah, look, I think the first season back to finish 10th was probably above and beyond any fans' dreams before the season started. I think that there were actually 3 pivotal signings at that point. Obviously, one of them was Polina, without a doubt, but the other 2 that I think you cannot take for granted are, the first one, Leno.
Yes.
Right. I still think he's a world-class goalkeeper. Yeah, yes, he's prone to mistakes. Every goalkeeper is, but you forget how much of an impact he had on us defensively, and the amount of goals that he actually stopped and saved that season. He was fantastic that season. And the other one is Willian.
Yep.
Bringing in that experience and that quality. So, at that point, you're looking at it and you're thinking, do you know what? Not only have we got some good quality Premier League experience now, but we've actually got, some quality world-class players now sitting in positions that are really key to what we need to do moving forward. And I think that really helped settle things down. And also it helped encourage the players around them, the more inexperienced players, and it gelled together. Silva then got the best out of that group, and we went on to finish 10th, which was, above and beyond what anyone could have expected at the start of the season.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to share this from a friend to the show, Gary Cooper. It says, Marco's the best investment Fulham have made in years. He's class. And Tony, I would agree with that, because what I'm going to add to this with him sharing this, Gary sharing this, is that you just said something that I think is a big difference between Silva and Parker. This is where I'm going on this, because I agree with our friend Gary here that it's the best investment they made. Because did the players get better under Parker? I would say as a group, the answer is no. Under Silva, I would say the majority of them improved. I would put it this way and see if you agree with me. He would take average players and make them good players. He made good players great players. So for me, that is a sign of a great manager that actually can make a player improve. That to me is the best way. The best thing I could say about Marco Silva is that the players got better.
Yeah. There's one thing that I haven't seen from Marco Silva yet.
What's that?
He hasn't shown the faith in one of our young starlets yet and given them an opportunity. And that is what I want to see him do next, Russell. I want to see him
totally agree. You and I are in agreement on this.
And have the trust and faith in giving some of these good quality young players that we've got at the football club and put them in the team and give them the opportunity to express themselves. I want him to put that fear factor to the side, and I want him to show that he can get the balance of having these good world-class players, turning average players into good players, but what can he do with these young players? Can he bring them on? Can he integrate them into the team? That's what I want to see next.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this goes back to the Matt O'Reilly decision, okay?
Yeah.
You let Matt O'Reilly go for Harry Arter. Parker does this. Now you have a situation, you and I have talked about this. I believe strongly in Luke de Figueroa. I've seen it right in front of my face. Okay, you and I are full agreement on that. I've also seen Devin Tanton, and there are other young players. I will also say there is a central midfielder. I'm not saying that he will take the place of Paulinho, because he's not the same player, but I want him to get a chance to play, and that's Adrian Pagliazzitti. Give him a chance to say, well, you're not good enough, then we need to send you out on loan. But give him the opportunity. Let him play and prove you either right or wrong. Same thing with Luke. Same thing with Devin Tanton and any other player. There are some younger players that are on the cusp of being in contention as well. I watched a 16-year-old take over a European semifinal, Tony, a Barcelona player, okay? Fantastic. Sometimes you have to have faith that the talent's there. You got to trust it. I wish Marco took that same type of attitude and trusted some of these young players throw them out there, throw them in the deep end and see if they can swim.
Absolutely. I think that's the one thing at the moment in his repertoire that we haven't seen. We didn't see it last year. He didn't really bring any youngsters through. They weren't really getting the opportunities. And also the season before that, when we finished 10th, obviously there was probably no room for it because, you know, he's trying to get a settled team down and whatever. But the thing is now, we've got an identity, Russell. We've got stability. 10th and 13th, 2 seasons back in the Premier League is a good return. But obviously now we need to be pushing on.
Absolutely.
We need to be pushing on. And if we finish anywhere below 13th this season, then for me, that's, you know, we're going backwards. We're not going forwards.
You and I are in total agreement on that. And we talked about this in the last show because Fulham should be striving for better, not for worse. They should, definitely. If they are in a relegation battle, shame on them because they should be building, not regressing. Definitely. And I just want to share a comment about this. You and I have talked a little bit about Jay. Your thoughts of what Gary Cooper shared. Be interesting to see if he gives Jay Stans first team action this year. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that he's obviously going to be in and around it because that's an area where, you know, we need to strengthen. There's no question about it. You know, we all know Moon has had an unbelievable purple patch towards the end. I still don't think the consistency's there. Stansfield, I think he'll get an opportunity, but you and I both know Russ, and we've seen enough of him this season in the Championship with Birmingham. I don't think he's physically set for Premier League football. That's just my opinion. I might be totally wrong. He's got a summer to build himself up and work hard and get himself fitter and stronger, but I don't think he's built to play that role up front on his own in the Marco Silva system. I think it's a big ask for someone like Jay Stansfield. Massive.
Okay. Well, you and I have talked about this. I want Jay to get a chance. Okay. I definitely want him to get a chance, but I also hope that he actually puts on a little weight. Like we're talking about. He needs to build up his body to deal with the rigors of the Premier League. Now, a player with a similar build, and I've mentioned this to you, Cole Palmer. Cole Palmer, I think, has a similar build, but he's a little bit, I think, stronger. I think if he got to that level, that build that Cole Palmer has, he might have a chance. So I want him to have a chance. I just hope that he builds up his body a little bit so he could deal with what would come to him in the Premier League. But I think it's worth talking about Jay, and I do hope he gets a chance. Okay. So, Tony, let's now talk about, because we're talking about doing better, right? But before we talk about doing better, let's talk about last season. And I got to be honest with you. I'm in Philadelphia, and I'm doing the Fulhamish live show, and they're asking me, do I think that Mitro is going to stay with Fulham? And at this point, I still believed in my heart that the Cons would not give in and that he would be a Fulham player last season. Well, when push came to shove, he moves on. And Fulham, actually, like I said, it was a very interesting season because on many levels, Tony, last season was very rewarding, even though it was a worse place finish than the 10th, because I think that this is a team that I enjoyed watching play together. But it took a while for it all to come together. It did. The decision to let Mitro go set Fulham back big time. Let's call it what it did. It absolutely did. And they never got a replacement for him. It was never going to be Raul Jimenez. It wasn't going to be. If you're going to get rid of your top striker, you have to bring in someone of that quality. I'm going to say it right now. If you're going to allow that to happen, they didn't do it. So that was a step backwards. But in the end, I enjoyed last season. Tony, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, you have to put everything in perspective, right? And the bottom line is, when you lose a player of the caliber of Mitro, you know, you're losing, let's be honest, if he's fit and he's well and he's playing to the best of his abilities, you're losing 10 to 12 goals, yeah, in that team. And that's a big return in the Premier League. So to start the season without him was huge. And of course, the worry's there because you're thinking, we've just lost, you know, a fan's favourite, probably a club legend. The way that it happened, you know, left a bitter taste in people's mouths, and understandably, because, you know, look, at the end of the day, a footballer's life is, you know, career is short. and they've got to get the money. I understand that. He was offered an unbelievable package. You're not going to turn it down. But then just be honest. Just be honest with the fans. Be honest with yourself. Go out with your shield, head held high. People respect you, and do it. I just think the way that it happened and the way that it was done, it just left a bit of a sour taste. So, and I think it would have affected the whole dressing room. I think it would have affected everybody, even Silva himself. So the fact that they brushed themselves down, they gathered their thoughts, they collected themselves up and went for it. I think shows that the resilience within the group and the mentality was very good, and they rolled themselves up. Yeah, all right, we didn't finish higher than we did the season before. 13th is a reasonable return, I think, based on where we were, the squad that we had, and the fact that we didn't replace Mitro. I think all in all, it was a good season.
Totally agree, Tony. It really is, and it's funny because here we are looking back, and I'm excited for what is to come next. Unfortunately, there's a lot to do, and as we're recording this, we are basically 40 minutes away. We're recording this live before the England match, and I know everyone's going to be watching that. And I want to just say, listens back, that I want England to win in the worst way, Tony. But I do want to just say this before we wrap this up, okay? You and I have talked a lot about this because when I get ready to watch this match and I look at the players coming out for England and how talented they are, and it reminds me a lot of Scott Parker's years at Fulham, because I think the style of play is very similar. And I know we're going all the way back talking about Parker, but for anyone that is listening, wanting some Parker talk, if you're a Burnley supporter, I think Tony and I will agree on this, that there are some similarities between how England play and how Fulham played under Parker and how he actually coaches. And I do hope that they win today, Tony. I really do.
Yeah, look, it's watching England this tournament hasn't been pretty. It's as simple as that. The system doesn't fit, in my opinion, doesn't fit the players that we have. But every manager has a way of playing, has an identity. This is Gareth Southgate's identity. I haven't enjoyed watching it. I find it turgid. At the end of the day, he's got us to a semi-final, which we're playing in tonight. And you know what? If he wins that and gets us to a final, people can say what they want. He's done what he's been paid to do.
Right.
But look, at the end of the day, Scott Parker will show his true colours at Burnley because he doesn't know any other way, Russ. He is what he is. And they will see that very quickly.
And that's a thing. And I'll just say this, like I said, I don't wish Burnley any ill will. I hope that they have a good season. But a leopard doesn't change his spots. He's going to be who he is, right? He's
Correct.
going to talk a good game. We've already discussed this on the show. Get ready for two words that you'll hear over and over and over again. And Tony, the minute I say it, you're going to yep, you're going to hear fine margins, because you're going to hear that over and over and over again, because that's his favorite phrase, fine margins, especially when he loses. Well, it's fine margins. And the one thing that I will say, and I'll end with this, and like I said, Scott Parker, I'll give him his credit. The one thing that I want to mention before we go about Parker that we have not mentioned yet, that I did not like, and I'm going to tell the Burnley supporters if they're listening throughout this episode, I don't like a manager that never takes responsibility, or I should say he did a little bit, but hardly ever took responsibility. And he would literally throw his players under the bus. Tony, we saw that. That, to me, I don't like that. Now, I haven't heard Silva do much of that. Silva's taken some responsibility. He hasn't taken as much as maybe I would like at times, but I haven't heard him throw the players under the bus. And just that's something to look for if you're a Burnley supporter. Does he do that? I hope he doesn't, because I think that is in poor taste to throw your players under the bus. And I think it's always shows strength if you say, we lost as a team, I'm responsible, the players are responsible. I know egos are huge, but I think it's okay to admit when you got it wrong, Tony.
Yeah, look, my final thoughts on Scott Parker are this, Russ, and I said it at the beginning of the show. Scott Parker is good with words. He says all the right things. Okay, that's what Scott Parker does. And the fans will buy it for the first, 5, 10, 15 games. But once they start to see through it, and if results don't go their way and things start to go, badly, they'll start to see. They'll start to see very, very quickly. And, at the end of the day, the fan base will either tolerate it or they won't. And if they won't, they'll let the players know.
But I just want to mention this because I used to listen and watch a podcast, a video series called Back of the Net. It's a bunch of Bournemouth supporters, and they're put on a fantastic show. And I watched them throughout that year. And they did exactly what we would do, what Burnley supporters are going to do. They backed the manager. But as the season went on, Tony, this is what I witnessed. Even though they were winning, they were starting to notice what we had been saying. And at the end of the season, and especially the next season, when they're in the Premier League, we finally got from the Bournemouth supporters, the Fulham supporters were right. And unfortunately, I have a feeling we're going to hear that again, Tony.
No, I mean, yeah, more than likely. And yeah, we'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. I don't wish it. I don't wish it to end badly for Burnley. I'm just trying to be honest with you how it was for us at Fulham and why we feel so strongly about this. He's a polarizing person. There's no question about it. But in the end, why I did this show was him deciding to leave was, in my opinion, the best thing to happen to Fulham since the playoff final in 2018. There have been a lot of good moments in between that, but that decision led to Marcus Silva and what we have now. So it all worked out in the end.
Absolutely.
All right. Tony, thank you so much for doing the show. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. Before we go, I just want to mention, if you're watching on YouTube, please do subscribe on YouTube. We're trying to get the numbers up. I would highly appreciate that. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up the show now. For Tony Gold, I'm Russ Goldman. Thank you as always for watching and listening to Cottage Talk, part of the talkSPORT Fan Network.